Oh, Yumblies, welcome to the Naked Mennonite, the podcast for all of Menno Simons's black sheep, the ones who maybe don't necessarily feel like they fit in everywhere. This is the podcast that's all for them, I, of course, am your host, Stephen Harder. I'm sure if you're listening, you probably know my parents, Mr. and Mrs. Diedrich Harder from Gruntal. Farming out there for a number of years. And I've got an interesting phone call lined up today. Let me tell you, I'm going to be speaking with Mr. Paul Reimer, who lives in the Steinbach area here, and just learning a bit about his story, his history in the area here, and some of the hurdles and obstacles that got thrown in the way of this young sprinter. And how he has, cleared those hurdles and where they've taken him in life now. So I'm very interested to see what our conversation sounds like here today. I think it's going to be a very good one here. I'm just going to try and pull him up here on the party line here and see if I can't ring him up here.
Hello.
Hello, is this Mr. Paul Reimer of the Steinbach Exchange?
It is me.
Oh, excellent, Mr. Reimer here. This is Mr. Stephen Harder calling you up today. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Excellent. Are you still good for a little bit of a chitty chat here today?
Oh, I would enjoy visiting with you, yes.
Excellent. So good. Pleasure to make your acquaintance here over the party line. I'm really looking forward to this. I hear that you got quite the story to tell. So obviously, this show here is called the Naked Mennonite. So there's two things that you gotta be in order to be on the show. One, you gotta be naked, So, I can confirm for you that I got my Wranglers over there by the back door. And I've got my, button-down flannel shirt off on the kitchen table there. And Fruit of the Looms are over there in that corner there. So I can confirm for you that, I'm sitting here on the kitchen stool without a stitch of nothing on. Can you, confirm the same?
I did not know that was a requirement.
Oh, sorry. I thought maybe you would. Yeah. Will that be a problem for you?
Oh, I'm sure it won't. It's only 14 below right now.
Oh, I got to replace the weather stripping around the back door here. It gets a little bit nipply here for the boys sometimes, So, but yeah, I can give you a moment there if you need to, get yourself ready for the emotional vulnerability that comes with being on a show such as this.
Okay, this might lead to triggers, but we'll give it a try.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good. So the next thing we need to confirm is that you are, in fact, a Mennonite. So I've got, a quick little quiz for you here. Just 3 questions. First one is, which conference were you baptized into?
I was baptized into the EMC, Evangelical Mennonite Church.
Oh, good answer. Good. EMC or Clangemeinde?
Well, they started off as the Clangemeinde many years ago, and then they changed their name to EMC.
Oh, okay. So which one were they when you got sprinkled?
EMC.
Okay, they were the EMC. Got it. I don't know my dates. I don't know how. Maybe that was a very offensive thing for me to ask. Maybe they changed over in the 1800s or something.
No, I think it was maybe the 1940s.
Oh, okay. Or
50s.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep.
Oh, yo. Okay. Okay, so that's a big check mark next to that one there. Okay, question number 2 would be, what is your favorite secondhand thrift store to shop at?
That qualifies me to be a Mennonite?
Oh, well, if you give the right answer, yeah.
Well, because I live in Steinbach now, I have probably spent more time in the Steinbach thrift store than any others, but I will admit, wherever I travel, I always look for the thrift store because you never know what little treasures you might find.
Too true.
So, and many communities have them. But if I know they're a Mennonite thrift store, whether it's MCC or somebody else, then maybe I feel a little more at home.
Oh, it looks a little bit familiar. Maybe you see something that your grandma donated a couple years back.
Well, I probably wouldn't know that, seeing as I've never met any of my
I guess so.
grandparents.
Maybe that might be stretching a little too far
Yep.
back. But so are you saying that if you had to choose between MCC and
Mhm.
Value Village, what would you choose?
Oh, I would choose MCC, hands
Okay.
down. Value Village is still sending money and paying money to people who have CEO positions, and they're an organization that I don't always support. Whereas MCC, I will support till the cows come home.
Interesting. Good to know. Okay, good. That's another check mark there.
Okay.
And then what is your favorite brand of Zote?
Brand of Zote.
Yo.
I have no idea what the brands are. I like sunflower seeds.
Okay, well, like there's
Roasted.
like there's Ronnie's, and then there Spitz, right?
Oh,
Yeah, those
okay. I recognize the name Spitz.
are okay. So you're probably and I think they're out of Altona.
Okay.
I don't know for sure. I get the feeling. Maybe someone needs to fact check me on that. I think Spitz come from either Altona or Vancouver. So
Well, yeah, Altona is the sunflower capital of Canada, or
Right?
something, isn't it?
with that big painting and everything,
Yeah. You know, you're in the sunflower country when you go there.
Yeah, because you got the big Van Gogh, not the biggest one anymore. Apparently, he's painted a bigger one yet. So I don't know if they need to maybe do an extension on it, add on to it a little bit, make it a little bit bigger, perhaps. I don't know. Maybe they could. I don't know what you would add to that painting to make it bigger. I guess you could just like make the easel bigger. Would that count, or is it
Or
the
extend
painting
the legs.
Okay, yeah, that would make it taller for sure. If you could add something, like put an extra 10% around the edges of the sunflower painting and add something to it, what would you add to it?
More sunflower seeds.
More sunflowers. Never too many sunflowers. What would I add to Van Gogh's? I don't even know what it's called. Oh wait, I'm not even.
Sunflower.
It's called. That's a good name. That Van Gogh guy, he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
And like it's a vase with like sunflowers in it. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Because for some reason I had in my mind it was a field of sunflowers.
Nope.
Oh, okay. So then if I had to add something to a picture of a vase of flowers around the edge, choose anything. I don't know, butterflies. Yeah. I think butterflies would be a nice little addition to the sunflower painting there. Maybe someday I'll sneak out there in the dead of night and I'll see if I can improve upon Van Gogh's sunflowers a little bit.
Good luck.
Okay, that's a 3 out of 3, Paul, here. Congratulations. You are, in fact, a Mennonite. So welcome to the program here. Really appreciate having you here. Give me, and anyone who might be listening in on the party line here, give us, a little bit of, a short synopsis. Like, if people wanted to know who is Paul Reimer, what are the 3 things that you would? What's the elevator pitch on Paul Reimer? Who is he? Just in this tiny little snapshot.
Good question. I'm a dad. I'm a grandfather. I'm a teacher. I've been a teacher for a long time.
You don't look it.
No, don't look like a teacher.
Not a long time.
Oh, okay. I'm a missionary's kid. I'm a preacher's kid, which makes me a third culture kid because I have no idea where home is, having traveled too much, lived in too many places, uprooted too many times in different countries, different provinces, different states. So I guess third culture kid. I said that already. And what else? And as of 2015, when I finally came out with it, I'm a survivor of sexual abuse as a child on the mission field. So that was never my claim to fame during my entire life. That was what I thought would damn me to hell. But when all hell broke loose after I began dealing with it, that became a really central issue for me. And probably in the last 7-ish years, maybe more, I'd say if you ask who is Paul Reimer, I'm somebody who's been living through hell and who has been getting healed from hell and is trying to find my way to health. And I would say I'm an ally. I'm also an ally to others who have suffered trauma, especially in the area of sexual abuse or any abuse. Let's see what else. Former athlete, I guess, too. Mm-hmm.
You know what they say. As I fall off my stool here, sorry about that. They say that you can't spell health without hell.
All right. How many L's are there in health?
Well, I don't know. It just sounds right, though.
Okay. I was an English teacher. Also, I know how to count up to at least 3.
So you know a little bit then about words and their what's that? The word for the history of words.
Etymology.
That word there. What was that again?
Etymology.
Etymology. Yeah, that's also the study of bugs, right?
Well, we could look it up.
Interesting. So it sounds like you have led a very like interesting is such a pat word, because interesting is what you say when something's noteworthy, but you don't know what that note is. It sounds like you've had a full life. Is that a good word? Full?
Oh, absolutely. If I were to die tomorrow, I think I could say I'm dying a happy guy because I really have lived a full life. And as I'm not one who believes in heaven or hell, except for right here and now, I would just say thank you. It's been quite the ride. Some of which, the hell part, of course, was super, super difficult and at times led to such darkness that I can identify with suicidal folks. I can identify with people who finally have had enough and just cash out. And I would never have been able to say that unless I had decided almost by luck, bad luck, good luck, to confront my past, my childhood past. And that's something that I didn't ever talk to anyone about. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell my teachers. I didn't tell any girl I dated, and not my wife when I got married. I never told my kids. I told nobody. And even when my life began to fall apart after going back to where it happened in my life, going back to visit my childhood home as a missionary's kid, my partner at the time told me when I came back from that trip, I was a changed person and never recovered. And I did not tell anyone anything, even for 5 years after I came back from that trip and confronted the place where I was tortured and raped and the place where... Am I allowed to say that in this thing?
No, absolutely. Okay. It's the party line, right? If anyone doesn't want to hear it, they can hang up.
They can hang up. So I don't hear any clicking yet.
I hear a little bit of heavy breathing, though.
Well, I kept it a secret for my whole childhood and for a very, very long time. I was 55 before I finally told the truth. And I think the process of falling apart when confronting the places where this happened and then coming back and realizing, oh my goodness, does anyone know? Did I let anything out of the bag? And I had so successfully buried that stuff in my past and had learned that nobody must know that I didn't know the power it had over me. And only years later, after years of therapy, would I understand fully that unless you name something and you open up that package, whatever it is, and stare it down and feel it, it will control you, and it will control you to your grave and maybe even push you to your grave. And when I began to learn how true that was, I realized with my therapist's encouragement to begin making that part of my story. So who am I? I'm all of those things. I'm a dad, I'm a coach, I'm a teacher, I'm a former athlete, all of these things. But now I can also loudly and maybe proudly, although with pain, say I'm also a sexual abuse survivor.
Interesting. Well, what's the point of going through those hardships if there isn't that hope that you can come through it and that there is a better time down the road where it isn't just the hardness. That you're paying the tuition, but you're getting something back out of it in return, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the idea that comes to my mind. If we rewind a little bit, I think the other day I saw a book about your father. He was Ben D. Reimer, right?
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell me about your father a little bit? I'm sure that I've seen his picture around because I saw his picture on the spine of the book. And I was just like, oh, that man looks familiar. Who is that guy?
And if you look inside, you'll see I wrote the foreword for that book. Yeah, my dad was a local. He grew up in Landmark. His father was either a teacher or preacher in Landmark. And then he eventually moved to Steinbach when he and his, I think, brother and a cousin or something like that started up the Steinbach Bible College. So he was the president of the Steinbach Bible College for the first, I have no idea how many years because I wasn't around. And my mom, who was a missionary, a single woman and a missionary, decided that in her 30s, she decided to go back to school to get more educated. And so she chose Steinbach Bible College to attend. And that's where she met my dad. In fact, maybe in my mom's second year or something like that, my father's wife died of negligence and after surgery. And my mom had been helping out in the home so that she could lower her tuition or help pay her tuition or something like that. And that's how my mom and dad met. So my father was, by the time I came around onto the picture, he's now in his second marriage. The majority of his kids are somewhat older. His three youngest were still single-digit age when their mom died. And because my dad was an evangelist and he was recruiting people to both be students at the school as well as teach and work at the school, and he was raising money for the school as well, he simply was one of those old-fashioned fathers who just wasn't at home. And when you're doing the Lord's work, you're not at home. You're doing the Lord's work, which in those days, maybe today too, still meant you're out there serving other people. So my mom joined a family that was in mourning, in really deep mourning because of the death of their mom. And she was suddenly cast into a mother's role. And my father told her, because my mom agreed to marry my dad as long as she did not have children. The agreement was no kids. Then I'll marry you and I'll look after your children who are younger. And then my dad, I think, began to see very quickly that this was not going to work out for my mom because he was so much older than my mom. And he knew he would be gone long before my mom. He was concerned that mom would not have anyone to look after her in her old age, who would be there for her. And so he convinced her to have some babies of her own, which made things even more difficult in our home because now not only is there a whole first family with 8 kids, now my mom is bringing 3 more into the family, and the first family, just the ones who stayed at home, hated that. It was too much. It was just a really difficult time. And I think my mom and dad did the best they could with what they knew and the way conventions were at the time. But my father then, because he had agreed to stay at the SBC, every time it came his turn between the 3 guys who were going to take turns being the president, every time it came his turn to go off and continue his education and, get a master's degree or whatever, then his brother or cousin would always say, well, we're almost done our own. Can you stay on one more term as president and then we'll change? And after about the third or fourth time like that, the board, led by a local guy who is also from Morris and very, very vocal about it, he led a movement to have my father removed from the school he invented and was the president of, because he was not educated enough to be able to teach there and act as the president of the school. And so he was fired from his own school and given $1,500. And I guess what I imagine hearing is the German line "Go weiter," which is just another way of saying "piss off."
Oh, yo. I've heard that kind of barn language before.
Yeah, that was barn language. And so what that meant was Dad had to find another way of making it through life. And he turned to being an itinerant minister, taking over some churches here and there where they needed a pastor. So we moved down from Steinbach. We moved to Kansas, and my dad worked in Kansas for a while at a church. And then from there, he had an opportunity to go down to Paraguay, to La Esperanza, which is a ranch where a bunch of EMC workers had either helped build this place or fund it or whatever. And there was trouble because the guy who had kind of set it all up was running away with people's investments, and there was some corruption going on. And so it wasn't a pretty scene. So they asked my dad to maybe come down and help stabilize the whole thing and transition it into a proper mission station. And so on my 6th birthday, we flew down as a family, and it was just my mom, my brother and sister, and our father, and none of the kids from the first family who had lived with us in Kansas, but they did not come down to South America. And so the irony here is, I only learned this much later, that my mom had gone to my dad and said, "I'm leaving." And my she just couldn't handle it in the family anymore. She was just worn out and felt so hated and ostracized and out of her depth. She told Dad she was out of there with her 3 kids. And he said, "You can't leave. Divorce is a sin. You'll burn in hell for eternity." And so Mom just had to hang in there. And Mom has said going to Paraguay saved their marriage. That's where they were able to experience some peace. And my dad had ulcers when we went down there. In fact, he took a suitcase filled with Tums. And within a few weeks of arriving down there, he had no stomach aches anymore. And so he began handing out Tums to the indigenous people. We lived with 2 tribes in the jungle, and he would hand out Tums to people. And the stuff they were eating and drinking was probably horrible. So it really helped their tummies to have these Tums, and they called my dad the Great White Witch Doctor from the north.
Wait. Tums helps your tummy. Is that the etymological root of that name, you think?
Oh, if you're drunk, it is.
Now, I just want to get a little bit more context here. So how long between your dad's first wife passing and getting married to his second wife? What kind of time frame is there?
I think that would have been about a year.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. Very, very quick.
Wow.
Very quick. And you can see how the kids from Dad's first marriage would have had especially the little ones, would have been just not only traumatized by their mom's death and disappearance, but then felt traumatized by a sudden new mom who stepped in. And, in those days, people didn't necessarily, or at least in our family, they didn't know how to talk about these things, or they didn't know how to process the grieving and understand what was going on. And I think my mom equally was unprepared for the serious emotional and intellectual challenge that was thrown into her life. And so...
Must have been a bit of a whirlwind romance.
Oh, I wouldn't have called it a romance at all. No, it was an offer. And you know how things were stated in those days, and they still are. I still hear people talking about the Lord's will. And if it's the Lord's will and God spoke to me and told me this is what I must do. Well, God did not speak to my mom. She didn't hear that message. I guess just Dad heard it. And so what's interesting about this too, and I know I'm giving away secrets from the family here, but my father told my mom, if you decide no, because he went to see her where she was working south of Morris on one of the reservations down there. And he went down to take her out for coffee. They went across the border into the U.S. because it's right close to the U.S. border. And he didn't want to be where anybody else would be while he made the offer, which was that she could marry him and join his family. And he told her there, if you decide no, don't tell anyone that I asked you. But my mom said yes. And that's why I'm here.
Interesting. Interesting. So do you think, because you're saying that she was on the mission field, where was she? Which mission field was she on?
She was at there's a reservation straight south of Morris, like 15 minutes. It's just off, and the name of it escapes me right now. But my mom did take us there when we were born and young, just so we could see one of the places where she had been just before she got married to Dad. Okay. Joined the family.
So she wanted to, upgrade her education. She comes to the Bible college. She meets a man there, and then the man comes and says, "Hey, do you want to leave, this mission work that you're doing and join me or support me in my ministry?" Is that how something like that gets parsed?
I have no idea. Like I said, I wasn't there.
Yeah.
And the only part I know is that Mom agreed to do this in whatever way.
Right. But the understanding is that she's going to put away what she was doing.
Yes, absolutely. Give up her own life, her own future, her own mission work, her own 30-some-year-old wanting to be single and not have kids. My mom did not grow up in a good home. She grew up in a home with an alcoholic father, a lot of violence, really, really poor. And it seems to me when I hear the stories and see my uncles and aunties from my mom's family that many of them just tried to get the heck out of that family as fast as they could and marry the first person that came along just to get away. And my mom decided, I'm not doing that. I'm just not going to marry. It's too much to care about or work her way through. But she did. And the irony is that when she felt out of her depth and just like she could not go on, Dad gets fired, and we end up moving to South America and eventually, and then spend until I was just turning 10 before we come back to Canada. And it was during those 3.5 years in South America where a neighboring missionary's kid, he wouldn't have been twice my age, but or size, but he was significantly older and definitely bigger and stronger than me, and he's the boy who eventually, what do you call it, manipulated me, prepared me. What's the word they use? Groomed me into being his little sex slave. For whatever he wanted to experiment with. Yeah. So that was my introduction at age 6 to sex, and or maybe I was 7 by then. And being introduced to sex like that means that I don't ever have the opportunity later on as a teenager or an adult or whatever to experience this for the first time and find joy through experimenting or through all of that stuff. I'm already used goods by the time I'm a kid. And of course, that basically damns me for all kinds of things. And not that I would have been able to articulate it at the time because I didn't know what was going on. But the torture that went along with it immediately, in order for me to remain silent and not tell anyone, taught me at a very, very young age that I was not protected. I was not protected or cared for by God, to whom I prayed and called for help all the time. I was not protected by my mom and dad because they were busy doing the Lord's work and not paying attention to whatever signals I might have been throwing. And I understood also eventually, or I guess it was processed inside of me, even though I couldn't have articulated at the time, that the church did not protect those of us who were out there. And the fact that when we moved back to Canada, was labeled retarded because I couldn't read, I couldn't write, I couldn't function, I could barely speak. Took me to grade 4 to learn how to read. And it's because, and now I know, looking back, I was a very, very traumatized little kid. And I was so shell-shocked by what I had been put through. And of course, the irony there is that while all of this was happening in my life, and I was terrified and didn't know what was going on, I had to lie constantly to my parents about what was going on and what I was doing, because I knew if I told the truth, I was in great, great danger, and maybe my mom and dad would be too. So it was safer not to say anything. And so besides the other things that I learned about my parent, about not being safe, about God not caring, and all the rest of it, in our home, we'd learned clearly that lying sends you to hell. God damns all liars, and those kinds of things. So in my puny little 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old mind, I knew that I was damned to hell because I had to lie all the time about what was going on. And those of us who have experienced abuse, we know that we live a life of deception all the time. We have to cover what happened to us. We have to behave as if we're fine. We have to, in fact, work our asses off so that nobody will find out, and so that we will be acceptable as we grow older. And because I didn't know how to do any of that, I was just a kid. The only thing that I knew to do was get away from as much as I could, stay away from the house, stay away from his house, which was right next door, like 50 meters, maybe 100 meters away. And so I began running as a kid. And I would run and run and run barefoot, because we lived in Paraguay after all. And we were in the jungle, and the roads were all sand. There were no rocks. So I just ran like crazy. And I think I remember saying to some people that when we moved back to Canada, my mom said to me, you were running up to 3 hours a day on some days. So when I got to Canada, here's the great irony, is coaches would see me at school or wherever on the team, and they would just think, holy smokes, look at that kid go. And I was literally running for my life, running for my mental health, not knowing that this was my addiction, and not knowing that this dedication to physical torture of running and running and running, which gave me pleasure because it was safe, turned my little body into a very, very strong athletic body. I began to win when I got to Canada. Whatever I competed at, I won. And ironically, my running led to, all kinds of accolades in the sports world, and playing on some junior national teams, both in track and field and volleyball, and playing soccer as well. And then eventually coaching. But that came from my addiction. And anyone who looks into the survivors of abuse, it doesn't take you long to see that the majority of these folks are drinking themselves to death, or are drugging themselves to death in one way or another, or are dealing with their pain in ways that often are really destructive and hurtful to themselves, but they just are in so much pain that they don't care. Just, it takes their mind away from knowing who they are, because those of us who've been through this, we all blame ourselves. It's always our fault. And I had successfully learned to just work harder, volunteer more, run harder. And to add to the story of why I never told anyone ever, my mom and dad died without knowing. And I certainly got married without telling my wife at all, and never in my marriage saying anything. But I had thought as a kid when we'd moved back to Canada, maybe I would tell my mom and dad because I'd be safely away from the family and the guy who was at the center of all of that. But our home was maybe like many other EMC homes, or maybe many Mennonite homes, or maybe even many Christian homes, or maybe just many homes everywhere, regardless of religion, where people don't talk about sex. And in my home, we never talked about sex, especially not the kind of sex I had been involved in as a kid. So I realized very quickly that was super uncomfortable, and I just couldn't talk to my mom and dad. And I really believed they would not believe me. How was I going to prove this? And yet while I say that now, I think, wow, I was actually exhibiting so many symptoms of an abused kid. And years later, when I went into therapy and I was asked to tell my life story and show pictures and things like that, one of the therapists who is a specializer in childhood sexual abuse looked at the picture of my grade, either kindergarten or grade 1 picture, and just looked at that face and said, "What do you see?" Well, yeah, fear, trauma, hesitation, incredible sadness, and as I discovered later, so much anger, just filled with anger. And maybe that's why I became such a good athlete, because I channeled my anger at God, at the church, at my abuser, at my family, for not protecting me, for what I've been going through, and for not having the freedom to talk about it. I channeled it into just run, and run harder. And after I decided not to tell my mom and dad, and then I started making provincial teams, and then prairies teams, and then Western Canadian teams, and so forth, I thought I might talk, because we always traveled with psychologists, team psychologists, and counselors who would help prep us for competitions and mentally toughen us. And one of the first things I learned through all of that, besides I'm never telling any of them anything, because in a competitive world like that, you're always wanting to put your strongest foot forward. And when I was in the 1970s competing at that level, the strongest foot forward was to be so brave and so strong and so untouchable that you simply never admitted anything, because it could be seen as a weakness. And very quickly we found out that if you talk as a male, you're weak. And that's been the message forever, is men don't talk, that's weak. Women do, but not men. Men don't feel, that's weak. Men don't, they just brush it off and they get their chin up in the air and they carry on. So I also learned that you might lose your starting position on a team if you start sharing information that could be used against you, or that could be put back and be seen as casting doubt on your mental strength. So I just shut up. And then many years later, I ended up at the University of Winnipeg on a volleyball scholarship. And in my first intro psych course, there was a small portion, like not a unit, but just a little blurb on one of the pages about sexual abuse. And because it was a general intro course, we didn't get into any depth. So I don't remember more than hearing one or two sentences, maybe a few minutes dedicated to that topic. But the one thing that I walked out of the room with at the end of the lecture was, if you were abused as a child, especially a young kid, and if you moved a lot and you were always changing homes or communities and you didn't feel safe in your own family, if you had those three things together with sexual abuse, you will be the next generation's abuser. So I heard I'm a pedophile in the making, in the waiting. And I determined at that moment, nobody will ever, ever, ever know what my past is, because there's no chance of getting a job. There's no chance of being a teacher, for crying out loud. Who would ever want to date me if I'm a future pedophile? Who would ever want to leave their kids in my trust? So I I had to decide hardcore, never, ever, ever raise this, never admit anything. And in order to do that, I turned on, because I had used my athletic ability as social capital. Like, nobody likes a shy kid who, especially, is always the immigrant kid who's always new and nobody knows. The only way that I got in and began to be accepted was by beating everybody in sports, and then trying to take part in every drama and anywhere where I could be involved in acting, because I was deceiving all the time. Excuse me. And I realized my life is going to be a deception anyway, so just make it really, really busy, and fall back on what the sports psychologist did, which was teach me to deceive others. Don't ever show them your weakness. Don't show them your pain. And so instead of becoming more honest with anybody about who I was or what had happened to me or what motivated me, I lived a life of deception. And I know that sounds harsh, and people who have not gone through this, they may not understand that kind of a strategy. They just say, oh, come on, everybody goes through that. We're all like that. No, you didn't, and people, they so don't want to hear about your past that immediately they start minimalizing it, and they start saying BS like, oh, everyone goes through that. What? You're no different than anyone else. And so you just stop talking, and you don't share, and you don't go to anybody, and you simply don't open up. And it was only years later when my brother and sister invited me as a 50-year-old to go back to Paraguay as adults, 40 years removed from when we left there, and go back after 40 years to see where we lived in the jungle and what it was like. And both our parents were dead by then. Actually, our mom died the next year. But going back to confront and seeing the well that I got stuffed down, that was almost the first thing I saw, was the top of the well, where I got stuffed down 25 feet under and left there during a part of the day, and told I would never get out and I would drown down there if I ever told anyone. So I'm a 7-year-old kid who's at the bottom, 25 feet underground, looking up. Nobody knows I'm there. All I know is that the rainy season is coming, and there's going to be a lot more water in this well very soon. And the ladder was removed once I was down there, and I got the shout from above, "You're not telling anyone or you're not getting out." So when I saw the well, I asked my brother to take a picture of me standing over it. Didn't tell him why, but I felt like, okay, I've conquered this. I'm over it. And then we walked a little further, and I saw the fence line where a lot of this stuff happened, and including with the indigenous kids, with animals, all kinds of stuff went on there. And missionaries' kids are not only third culture kids often, but some of us who've been unfortunate enough to be sexually abused or abused in other ways in the mission field. Many of my cousins were sent off to boarding school. They didn't even get raised by their parents. And boarding schools were full of abuse as well. And what people sometimes don't understand is that being a third culture kid means you literally don't belong anywhere. And so you also don't know how to communicate. You don't know how to find home. You don't know how to find peace. And all of that contributes to trying the hardest you can to figure out how to fit in. And so years later, when I was falling apart after having gone down to Paraguay with my siblings, and like I said earlier, I didn't talk to anybody. I didn't tell anyone what was going on inside of myself because I didn't understand it. And I had been so successful in working my ass off, in being so successful, winning awards, teaching awards, academic awards, sports awards, coaching awards, innovative house building and design, and like whatever I did, I wanted to be the best. And I understand now that what I was desperate for was acceptance and make sure nobody ever found out or would question me about my past. Because if I could just be the bearer of information and the bearer of all things possible, the bearer of I can sweep in and fix your refrigerator or whatever, and then I'm out of here, then nobody will ever question me and get into, why are you like that? What is it about you that just drives you so crazy, and on and on and on. And during my, once I did fall apart, one of the books that I read or had read to me was Dr. Gabor Mate's book. What's it called? The name escapes me just now. But in it, he talks about people who've been abused and the perfect storm. And he's the guy who says, you know, you take born into an unstable and painful home, high stress home, moving a lot. And if you add sexual abuse to that, then 99% of those people in North America, where he treats and works with folks, are dead by like early 40s. And many of them drink themselves to death or drug themselves to death or sex themselves to death. They become so promiscuous in trying to find some kind of success or happiness or avoid the pain that they're in, that they just get every disease under the sun, I guess. And so those are three ways that people die. And then the most common way is suicide. And because I already had suicide in the family from the same thing, when it was my turn to start looking into this and get help from a therapist, I spent so much time being suicidal and just thinking it's not worth it. I'm in such a dark place. There is zero light coming for me from any God or church or religious leader. They just want me to follow them and their answers and their formula, as opposed to dealing with what I've been through or even listening to me. And I'm just super thankful that I was pointed to the Men's Resource Center in Winnipeg, as well as the Rainbow Center in Winnipeg. And that's where I came in contact with therapists and group therapy, which became my church. And that's where I would say my life was saved. And I don't in any way want to undermine or limit what my kids did for me. After my wife and I split up in 2014, we eventually got back together in 2015, and we said one of the conditions would be to go for counseling. And we did go for counseling. Dr. Battle, in fact, was our marriage counselor. and she asked for a session just with me after like 3 or 4 sessions. So I went back just on my own. And that's when she told me, I'm not a trained sex abuse therapist, but I'm going to guess that's part of your story, and I think you need to go for help. And then she gave me alternative counseling, and she said, this is not working for you, and it's not even where you need to be. So I got tickets from her, or I got tickets just then for the Sheldon Kennedy tour that was coming through Winnipeg. And I did go. I almost turned around, took the day off of teaching to go. And I was halfway to Winnipeg when I stopped the car and I thought, I don't know if I can do this. It's walking into a room is admitting I'm one of you. I'm one of them. And I didn't know if I had the courage to do that because I still had only told one person, and that was the doctor. When she said, "This is what I think," I told her the truth. And that was the first person I ever told about my childhood stuff. And she's the one who then said, "You have to tell your wife, you have to tell your kids, because they're going crazy blaming themselves for the hell that you're going through. And they probably are thinking all the wrong things and feeling the wrong things. And you need to let them off the hook." And so that was the other thing I learned, was you have to tell the truth. And then I started hearing more and more and more about you have to name the thing that's going on. I think with alcoholics, if I remember, when you go to AA, you start off by saying, "Hi, my name is so-and-so, I'm an alcoholic." That's naming something. That's admitting something. And that is the first step to gaining some kind of control or some kind of power or feeling self-love. And so that was what I was encouraged to do, was to name what had happened to me and who I was. And when I did end up putting the car in gear and still driving off to Winnipeg and going to the conference, 1,500 other people in there, athletes who had been abused, coaches who either had been abused or their players had been abused, parents of abused kids and athletes. This was more focused for athletes or former athletes. And I had no idea. And while I was sitting there terrified, on the big screen at the front, they were scrolling through stats of mental health situations and what happens to men who were sexually abused as children. And the stats are just horrific in terms of addictions and suicide and broken marriages and horrible, horrible parenting skills and all the rest of it for a lot of these people. So in some ways, as much as I heard and felt that God and the church and my parents as Christian pastors and missionaries had let me down and hung me out to experience all of this, and then I had to take control, and I had to become the number one controller of my destiny. So I never depended on others. I rarely asked for help. I always did everything myself because I never trusted anyone. And that's maybe the first thing that I learned as a kid, is you can't trust anyone, especially adults, especially men, especially bosses, especially people in leadership, especially churches. Maybe I said that already. And then wouldn't you know it, when you're vibrating at a certain level, that's often what you attract. So in many of my teaching jobs, I would end up with a principal who's an absolute maniac and who would find that I was a threat, or I was too much of a guy who did things on my own, or I was too driven, or I don't know what. Or I would say another thing that happened to me, maybe it was an outgrowth of all of this, was I became really sensitive and compassionate for marginalized kids, because that's who I was. I was this kid who couldn't read, couldn't write, didn't know, like always the immigrant kid. I said that before, had a hard time even speaking the language in some instances. And so as a teacher, my aim was give kids safety, give kids love, give kids protection, and be hyper vigilant. And my hyper vigilance, I didn't even know that that's how I trained my brain as I was growing up. And I only in therapy learned, oh, that's right. Every time I walk into a room, every time I walk into a conference hall, every time I'm in a theater where I'm giving a speech or a lecture, or I'm teaching something, anytime I'm attending something, I always check for exits. I sit near ones, I sit near the edge, or I sit in a place where I can make a quick exit if I need to, if somebody's preying on me. And like, I didn't know that I always did that. I'm the first to volunteer to leave. Oh, I can go pick up something. I can go do that. Just get me out of here, because I don't want to be where there are people who could take advantage of me. And even though here I am with all these awards in so many different areas and appearing to be so successful and so on top of my game. The fact is that I spent my life running scared. And that was the deception, because I acted and looked and behaved as if I was just totally together. And the reality was that, I'm glad that a lot of it was unconscious. I didn't realize that was going on, because I wouldn't be here now. I absolutely would have killed myself. When I told my kids, every single one of them just hugged me and said, "Dad, we love you." And they said, "No matter what happens, we love you. We understand. We're there for you." And my ex said the same thing. But I don't even know what to say. If it was, that's maybe part of the story, is that statistically that not many people survive marriages, if that's where they come from. Sadly, but good for the folks who do have a faith in God, whose churches do know how to rally around them and support them, who can look at God and say, "Yeah, I trust you. You've answered all my prayers," or whatever. For folks like that, they can throw their heart and their safety and those things back at the church, back at God, and they're good, and people surround them in love, and isn't that wonderful? That's the first place I can't go. It was destroyed for me as a child. And when you've got a little kid who is being abused by people in the church, and boy, my heart goes out to the Indigenous kids who are part of our Every Child Matters story across not just North America, sadly, but the church, Catholic Church, has schools and orphanages and places all over the world where these kinds of things happen. And they happen just as much in Protestant circles. So this is not a Catholic thing. This happens for just really rampant in the church. And so I was not able to go to the church or to God. I can't do that. It's the abuse I suffered was so pegged in my little brain on those institutions letting me down and not existing. It didn't exist for me. So how am I supposed to, as an adult, go back? And then when I tried, I sometimes almost got laughed out of a church or sent out of a church by people who just couldn't understand. You're supposed to be a Christian, a missionary's kid? What kind of bullshit are you sharing with us? View that we don't need to be out there saving other people's souls or whatever. They have their own God. What kind of a heathen are you? And so then I just say, no, not going there. And I am very thankful that eventually we did find Prairie Wind Mennonite Church, and it's a house church which had small numbers and probably was made 95% of those people had other traumas in their lives or other experiences which just told them can't function in a regular church or with a regular God or whatever. And so that's what my kids grew up with, and I'd say it was just a lot safer and healthier. Although at times they have said, Dad, Mom, whatever, us kids don't have the baggage that some of you older generation do here in this group. You guys are really railing hard against certain rituals in the church or routines. That, we don't have that problem because we actually like what we're learning and about God or ourselves or about all religions or whatever. So I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that my kids didn't have to grow up with what I grew up. And for the people who do feel safe there and who feel that they're going to heaven because they're going to a certain church or doing whatever they're doing, good on them. Carry on. I'll join you in heaven from a different path.
Oh, Paul, this has been such a such a good conversation. I think I think my hymn sing program is about to begin, and I don't want to be missing that. But I think I want to hear a little bit more about your journey too, and where exactly it is that your journey takes you. Would it be okay if we maybe connect again next week at the same time here, and we can chat a little bit more? Would you be okay with that?
Oh, I'd be happy to do that.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. I think that there's a lot more to this story here that I'm really interested to hear about, where else you need to go, and some of the wisdom that you have for us as a result of some of these hardships that you've had to face. So so I'm really looking forward to that conversation then. But until then, if you need to connect with any more of Menno's Black Sheep, you can find us on the Facebook group. We're always over there, and you can connect with us. But until next time, this is Stephen Harder, reminding you, underneath our Sunday best, we are all naked. We'll talk to you later.